All right, everybody, welcome to week five. We are kind of shifting our focus. The first 4 weeks, we were looking at theories of democracy, what it is, how it functions, what its value is. We looked at a lot of those ideas. Now, the second half of the semester, we are looking at the critiques of democracy, right? Arguments that are looking at what people think as maybe inherent weaknesses or flaws in the notion of democracy. So this week we are looking at some pretty typical stuff, traditional, what I'm calling left and right critiques. So on the left, we've got early 20th century communism and anarchism, which had strong criticisms of traditional democracy. And then on the right, we're looking at fascist and Nazi critiques as well. And the point of it is not, is not, oh, we're all going to try to, somehow now become anti-democratic in our thinking. But I think it is important to understand that these arguments do exist. And they're not just historical arguments, right? A lot of these arguments, as you'll see over the next couple of weeks, are still very much present in the work of people today, right? A lot of anti-democratic theorists today. So it's important for us to kind of go back and see what we've got there. So we'll start to go through some of these authors. So I want to start with the left critiques, and I'm going to do a very, very quick and simple introduction here. I think that these readings are interesting and really powerful. Fortunately, all of these authors, Hitler accepted, I think are compelling authors. Hitler's a little rambling and silly in some ways, but I just want to give a quick little introduction. And then have you kind of go over the readings and really get a sense of your own. So Mao Zedong, this is a very famous piece called The People's Democratic Dictatorship, and he really comes up with this idea that the government he is trying to create in post-revolutionary China is what he calls a democratic dictatorship. There are elements of democracy, right, that we've seen in lots of places. There is participation. There's democratic participation on the part of the people. There are elections. There are a lot of those institutions that Dahl sort of looks at and says, oh, yeah, I like these. These are democratic. But Mao also includes this sort of notion of dictatorship as well, right? Because he thinks that the government has the right to really radically restrict who can participate in political life. So these you may have free, fair elections, but they are not universal. He thinks that the democratic dictatorship should be able to ban reactionaries and counter-revolutionaries, right? Now, this doesn't mean that Mao is saying, oh, we're going to send all these people to jail for the rest of their lives, right? He actually says, no, they can go about living their life. They can, they can live on their farm and they can raise crops and things like that, and they can have a good life. If they engage in counter-revolutionary activity, if they engage in reactionary activity, then off to prison they go, right? If they don't do that, they can live and be happy and prosper. They just can't participate in politics, right? And why is this? Because Mao's argument is the form of politics that we saw before this, liberal democracy, is designed to preserve the power of one class over another. Mao thinks it's baked into that form of government. So we need a different form of government because he wants to not just ensure the rule of one party, but he wants to make sure the government is working for the betterment of the people, not just one class of people, right, or one social group. In order to do that, you need to remove people from the political equation who do not have the true interest of the people in mind, right? So that is the democratic dictatorship that Mao is putting out there. So really try to understand what he's getting at when he talks about this democratic dictatorship. He's not simply saying we need a dictatorship, I'm going to be in charge or something like that. He is trying to facilitate democratic participation, but clearly not universal democratic participation, right? That's really important. So try to understand what he's saying when he's talking about that. And then I just kind of threw this up there. I mean, is this an example of McPherson's one-party democracy? It could be, right? Maybe, maybe not. Emma Goldman, a very famous anarchist, has I would say, a similar conception, right? Her argument is government, even democratic governments, are alienating and destructive of human freedom. And this is a quote from her piece that I really like. The state is the altar of political freedom, and like the religious altar, it's maintained for the purpose of human sacrifice. So she is not a fan of democracy because she is not a fan of government. And it is naive of us to assume, she would argue, that a democratic government is somehow different than all other forms of government in that regard. For her, all forms of government are destructive of human freedom and human liberty, democratic governments included. This is why she advocates a system of anarchism that is designed to actually increase human liberty and freedom and human flourishing that cannot happen within inside a system of government. And I think Goldman and Mao, again, they both sort of understand, right, or they share this common understanding. They both believe that government is created to reinforce the power of the ruling classes, right? Mao is very deliberate about this. Goldman is very deliberate about this. They each have a different solution, right? Mao's solution is this democratic dictatorship. Let's ensure that the revolution can continue. Let's ensure that we have the best interests of the people in mind. We do that through democratic dictatorship, a form of government. Goldman says we need to just blow up all forms of government. We need this local anarchist form of government to exist, right? Those are their solutions. So think about the arguments that they're making, right, about democracy. They're really criticizing the idea that democracy is about universal rights, universal participation. This is a lot of the stuff that you all have been talking about in your papers, right? And they both really want to question, is a democracy really about universal participation? Like at its core, is that what it is? And they would say no, it is not, right? So important. The critiques on the right, Mussolini and Hitler. First of all, a disclaimer. A lot of the language that they both use, especially Hitler, comes across as extreme and highly bigoted, right? And I'm not going to deny that at all. It absolutely is extreme and highly bigoted. That being said, there is an argument that they're making underneath that bigoted language. And I think it's important to understand that argument because these are not arguments that died out in the 1940s. These are not arguments that died out with the end of World War II. These are political arguments that we still see today. There are groups and there are people advocating these arguments, right? So the language may be distasteful, the writing may be distasteful, but I think it's important to understand these arguments because they are still with us today. And maybe we look at these arguments and maybe you think, oh my God, these arguments are terrible. Maybe so. But we need to understand the arguments so that you can critique those arguments, you can push back against them when they pop up in the world today, which again, they very, very clearly are doing. We're going to see some of that the last couple weeks of the class. So again, I'm going to give you just sort of like, here is the key takeaway for each of these authors. For Mussolini, democracy is inherently a weakened form of government. It is a weak form of government. And for Mussolini, basically, everything comes down to strength and action. Politics is about strength. Government needs to be about strength. It needs to be about action. Can your government take action quickly and decisively? In a democracy, it can't, because you have to take into account the will of the people, right? But why do we assume that the people know best? Why do we assume that we need to ask the people for their opinions and their thoughts, right? We shouldn't be caring about the people. The people are weak. The masses, this is the famous line, the masses are asses, right? Mussolini kind of takes that line up, right? Catering to the whims of the people is catering to the lowest common denominator, right? Like today, why should we care what Honey Boo Boo thinks about foreign policy, right? But in Mussolini's mind, that's democracy, right? It is ruled by reality TV stars, or it's ruled by, whatever you think the lowest form of entertainment may be, right? Those are the people that are in charge in a democracy, right? Mussolini is worried about that. Hitler also offers a similar argument, but he really focuses on this notion of the democratic claim of equality, which again is something we've seen a lot of our authors talk about, something you've all written about a lot in your papers, right? That one of the things democracy gives us is equality, and that's wonderful. And Hitler says, nope, that's terrible, right? Equality is a problem because we are assuming that equality is a condition of human existence. We assume that we are all equal. Clearly, when you read his piece here, you see that he does not believe in that. There are some people better suited to freedom than others. There are some people better suited to participation than others. Now, he casts this discussion in an explicitly religious/racial term, right? He says there is a certain race that is less qualified, right? Less prepared, less enlightened, right? And if we extend equality to all of these people, it's going to weaken the country because we're extending this notion of equality to people who are unequal, right? That's the argument that he's making. Also, equality and participation assume that everyone has good motives, right? Do all people want the common good, right? Extending equality and participation to all people means we are extending the right to participate to people that, again, this is Hitler saying, do not have the best interest of the country at heart, right? And again, he's casting this in a racial/religious terminology, right? But basically, there are people in this country who are weakening the country, who are damaging the country, and clinging to these ideas of equality is making it easier for them to do those things, right? So in the name of keeping the country strong, in his own language, keeping the country pure, he thinks that we need to get away from these notions of democratic equality, right? Again, very, very extreme language, very bigoted language. But again, language that people have picked up and continue to utilize to this day. So I think it's important for us to know the degree to which this language is pervasive. And in order to really understand that, it helps to kind of go back to what I would consider like the source of the 20th century kind of language that we're seeing, right? So that's the sort of basic right-left critique. You're going to look at some of these for your for the forum post and the paper this week. One slight difference in your end of the week reflection, rather than answering the questions you usually answer, I want you to come up with a tentative topic for your final paper or your final. I'm letting you do either a paper or a podcast. So you can write a paper or you can, write a script and record it as a podcast. And there's really, it's very much open to you, but, I want you to kind of take a question that maybe you've come across so far. And a lot of you come up with really good questions in your papers. I've tried to indicate that in some of my comments. And you're going to develop that into the question that you're going to try to answer in your paper or in your podcast. So for this week, the very last assignment, that end of week reflection, you don't have to answer the typical questions. I just want you to maybe just write a paragraph or so, thinking like, here's the question I'm kind of interested in. Maybe I can answer it this way. I just want to see what you're thinking. So I'll give you some comments on it. Again, it's a pass-fail assignment, right? So just submit it. You get full credit. It's just an opportunity for you to start thinking about that paper or thinking about that podcast, get the ideas down before you actually have to develop the thing. So that's the only real change for this week. After that, I will provide comments. I'll put comments on your, I'll put comments, in the assignment so you can read it. And take a look at the feedback, and then we'll start to develop the paper or the podcast script from there. So if you have any questions, let me know. Come and shoot me an email. Good luck with everything. If you have questions about the readings, let me know. Again, some of these readings can be tough to get through. They're not exactly pleasant to read in some cases, but again, they're important even if they are unpleasant. So that's kind of our task for this week. So questions, let me know. Otherwise, I really look forward to your answers and your thoughts and your arguments. I'm really enjoying a lot of what y'all are saying about these readings and really thinking at the heart of democracy and what it is and what it means. So keep up the good work, and I will see you again next week. All right, bye.